He said, she said. It's such a little thing, really. Or is it? In the world of fiction writing, craft seems to be getting more and more confusing every day. Prior to Amazon's self-publishing boom, writers had to work hard to find information. Now it seems like we have to wade through a myriad of it. There's posts and topics on the smallest of subjects. And they not only pull you in different directions, but sometimes 5 or 6 different directions. As creators, we end up either ignoring all of it, or we end up wading through a sea of information, trying to decide who might be legit, what opinions actually have some kind of logic behind them, and also who might be setting us up just to gain our business and sell us a service that really doesn't do us a service. Recently, after seeing this he said, she said debate erupt on some of the writing groups that I frequent, I saw that there was no middle ground. People were either over here saying never use it, or over here saying there's hundreds of alternatives that you should use. This division among creative people who usually pride themselves on thinking outside of the box, I mean, it honestly hurt my heart, because I think we should all be beyond this. So I decided to do a little bit of investigating into this he said, she said debate and see if some logic could be brought to the subject. What I found out was frankly disturbing, and those answers are coming up on this episode of The Story Detective. If you find at the end of this video that it has some value for you, remember to like and subscribe. It's very much appreciated. The first step in my investigation, of course, was to do an internet search. And I typed in words that could be alternatives to using said as dialogue attribution or a dialogue tag. What I discovered here were tons of articles and blog posts written on this. So I decided to take a closer look, read through some of the articles, look at the people who were writing the articles, because as a professional, whether it's me or you or anybody who wants to hire these people for services, we need to look at their bona fides. We need to look at who they've helped, who can we look up that they've published or helped get published well. What is their background? Or even if they're just starting out, does that mean they don't know what they're talking about? No, there's some very good people who have contributed to other people's blogs, who've read a lot, who've had some type of courses that excelled in certain subjects, and to bring their knowledge to you is fine. They can very much be of help to you. But at the same time, if they have something on their blog post that says, okay, they are the director of this website, and that's all they say, there's nothing else that you can find in their credentials, then to me, I'm going to be a little bit skeptical, especially if they're trying to sell services. And what I found when I read through these articles and tried to look up the people writing them, that's exactly what I found. I found one person that had 1 follower, another person that had a handful of followers. And the articles came in a way that said, and I don't want to put anyone in particular down, and yet this is something that I'm passionate about and something that disturbs me, especially when they're coming at newer writers who may not know any better. Why do I think they're coming at newer writers and trying to pander towards them? Well, if you look up some of them, you'll see there's things very much like, so you have a novel inside your head, but this little word said is getting in your way. Seriously, you've got an idea to write a novel and the word said is preventing you from writing it? The sad thing about this is I didn't have to look for those type of sites. When you do an internet search, you're getting the sites that are getting the most hits. The top sites are going to be up front. And when I started reading through the first handful of searches that came up, this is the sort of thing that I found. This was the top searches that were playing this kind of game. So in terms of experience, what do published writers? What do big name writers say about this subject? Stephen King, in his book On Writing, said to write he said, she said is divine. It's almost funny. Up until about a year ago, Stephen King's book On Writing was like the writing Bible for an entire generation. Now I'm running into people online who'd never even heard of King's book. So maybe writing craft will become like technology, where every 6 months what you know now will become outdated. So we'll never get our manuscripts finished because we won't be able to keep up with the changes. But I digress. The late Elmore Leonard was a master of dialogue, and he said, in his 10 rules for writing, never use a verb other than said to carry dialogue. Describe the character's actions instead of using said hurriedly or he mumbled. And never use an adverb to modify the word said. Instead, make the character's behavior describe what's happening. Saul Stein, in his book Stein on Writing, said, when revising, catch places where a character muttered, screamed, and the like instead of said. Substitute he said and she said for language that tells the reader how the lines are spoken, because that's the dialogue's job. Now, Saul Stein was not only a writer, he was a publisher and an editor. Saul worked with many of the people who became legends in fiction. In fact, it was Stein's vision who made them legends. So that carries a lot of weight right there. So where does all this leave us? As a writer, and as someone who's spoken with a lot of creative people, writers and otherwise, if anybody says they didn't have problems with the whole said thing, they're either full of it or they may be the exception to the rule. But most people come at this and they look at the word said and it looks like you're repeating it way too much on the page and it looks clumsy. I get that. I totally get that. This is tough on writers because we want to be creative with our choices, even in terms of dialogue attribution. We live in a world of information and misinformation, and between the two is where the dividing line stands between most of humanity. And how does that affect you, who just has a lot of ideas and you want to get your novel written? Then you step out into the world with your ideas and meet your peers, and suddenly you find yourself being pulled in all kinds of different directions, and people have a lot of ideas that they say are good while putting your ideas down. And it's usually just that few people within your peer group that seem to be the most dominant, that want to control everything, including what you do and how you do it. And there's that dividing line that appears, and you're standing right in the middle of it. No matter what you do and put out to the world, there's going to be the polar opposites. These are the people who love you, no matter how good or how bad your ideas are, and conversely, those who hate you just for being who you are. Now, these numbers are not your core audience, and they don't make up the majority, but they can yell very loud. And that can sometimes pull you in opposite directions based on your ego or your angst. And if you give in to those emotions and those extremes, you end up getting thrown out of balance and then you spiral. You have to stand your ground. And if you're consistent with your ideas, and your ideas are good or even halfway decent, you'll eventually win the respect of most of your peers because they see that you're striving just like they are. Now, you'll never, or almost never, win over those polar opposites because they're also standing firm in their beliefs and they have their shields up. The main thing is you have to find your comfort zone and stay in it and not be thrown away. Finding one's balance and standing strong usually comes from knowledge. And knowledge will tell you not only how to apply craft, but it should also tell you why and what you might gain from it. Does it make sense to you? Is it usable to you? It allows you to make up your own mind because it's attempting to broaden you. Whether you use it ultimately or change it in some way, it's not a battle and it's not trying to toss you away. So what can we do? When I personally get stuck on a problem, whether it's this or anything else, I usually refer back to the writers whose work I know and respect. And compiling that, this would be my best answer on this subject. Avoid the word said. That's my take. Use it as little as possible and only when it's absolutely necessary to clarify who's speaking. The best case scenario is if you can make it clear who is talking without having to tell the reader. Use an action to set up the dialogue. Catherine gazed at the room, all the furniture standing out in bright blobs of color without aesthetic. Looks like you used a 5-year-old's finger painting as a color guide. If it's necessary for you to use a dialogue tag, hide the attribution in the middle of a sentence where it stands out the least. Color, Heather said, adds flavor to life. And what about all those alternatives to the word said? Use them even less than the word said. Because if you're going to avoid the word said, why clutter up your page with a whole bunch of alternatives? The dialogue should carry its own decibels without the writer having a character shout, scream, or bellow. We should know what the person's mood or intent is without having to tell. Sarcasm, for example. I stand corrected, Catherine said. Your inspiration was the condiment shelf at the supermarket. Let's think in terms of adding something besides said to that last sentence for a moment. Replied, added, offered. We know Catherine is replying, adding to the dialogue, and offering her opinion. So stating those things can sometimes seem redundant because a writer should never tell the reader what is obvious or what they already know themselves. What about grunted, squeaked, or hissed? You can't really grunt or hiss and speak at the same time. And if you tell the reader Catherine is hissing out words, she sounds more angry than sarcastic. And you may lampoon your character. How many actors, when delivering an angry line, actually sound like they're hissing? Maybe a reptilian character in a science fiction story. My first writing mentor told me everything we write is delivered with intent, and to be careful of giving readers too much, or delivering dialogue in a way that might make them stop and think about the attribution in terms of the literal uses of the words. Many popular writers do get away with these things. We all know this, but they also have a reputation. And I think for us, the people that aren't on the bestseller list yet, we have to set a standard for our writing and don't let anything that falls below that standard to survive our final edits. And if you have doubts about it, well, there's a saying, when in doubt, leave it out. We all learn from one another's experience, and we learn by sharing our experiences. And I think when we're sharing those experiences, we have to back them up with the how, the what, the why. There's a lot of people out there that's going to tell you, do this, don't do this, and they don't exactly give you reasons. And that's frustrating. I need to know why. So when I'm doing these videos, I'm going to try to explain why. And if I'm not clear, comment in the section below and I'll be glad to expand upon anything. Hopefully we can learn a few points from one another, and even if we can't agree entirely, we can contribute to one another's arsenal of writing tools and leave each other with a little something to remember, a little something that we can both use. To me, that's the best option that you can have when you're discussing it with your peers. I think that we understand that we're all coming from a different vision and we're trying to bring that vision to life. And if we can help one another do that, then that's a win. Because the rest of the world, the non-creators, the people who are arguing over every topic under the sun becomes a debate, then all we have is division. We're not actually going to pull together in any area of life. Do you need anyone's permission to do what you like? No, you don't. You don't need my permission. You don't need 100 or 1,000 other writers' permission to do what you feel is correct. And if you disagree with my conclusions after I reviewed all this, that's totally your prerogative here because you're only accountable to yourself. I'm just giving you information and hoping that maybe it will be helpful to you.